So I guess it had to do with something I mentioned, which is this notion of believing in no God, but yet having an incredible value given to mankind. That we believe, if we see a child crying, for our own children, for people out in the world, that we do hold humanity to be important, that we want to redeem it, to take care of it. How do you wrestle with that or answer that question about where does the value of mankind come? Where's the goodness, the morality, the struggle of importance of mankind come when there's no God in that picture?
I would actually take it a step further. I don't think it's just humankind or mankind that has value. I think all of living things have value. And that's not, I think, often necessarily, I would say, a required religious view, for example, or a part of many religions. It is a part of some. And so that value can be there without recourse to God, a supreme being, a creator, or any of those things. I think there is an inherent value, and that value, I don't know, I guess I don't feel a need for an outside authority to tell me that there is that value. I experience that value, I think, as you do, personally. I value my family, I value my students, I value people I work with, I even like you guys, so far.
Yes.
And I think I guess I feel that if, in questions of morality like that, like value or something, I think if religion disappeared tomorrow, we wouldn't all be valueless. The value wouldn't disappear with it. I don't think there's any reason to believe that atheists are any less moral than believers of necessity. I mean, we've had plenty of immoral believers and we've had plenty of immoral atheists, but nobody has a lock on that, unfortunately.
Yeah,
so I guess I don't see the necessity of it. I feel that value can exist without recourse to a creator or a supreme being.
Let me invite a follow-up, and then I'll give Stu the same right.
Yeah, I was just curious because of reading Nietzsche. He really connects those two ideas up, right? So he says basically, if you really do value mankind and really do value humans, then you really aren't an atheist. That's what Nietzsche's stance is in some sense. In other words, that if you're going to not have God, then the value, the importance of man or importance of, I guess, any living thing is disconnected to him. So that's the only reason I was curious about that statement. So pushing it from Nietzsche's.
I think it was Richard Feynman who sort of came up with this sort of classification, and you don't have to agree with it. I'm not sure I agree with it entirely. He felt that religion sort of operated on three important levels, if I get this right, which he called metaphysics, which is a way of describing the world from a religious point of view, ethics, which is a way of living in the world from a perhaps religious point of view, and then inspiration, which is the motivation to do it. I think his logic or his argument was that from a metaphysics point of view, he preferred science as an explanation of the world, that at one time or in some period of history or in some areas perhaps still religion gives a passable explanation, but that science explanations for him seem to be better, or at least science is as good as religion at explaining. So metaphysics is a draw. Ethics, which is the question we're sort of talking about now, knowing what's right to do, he also felt was a draw, I think for the same arguments that I just made, which is, I think we all believe also, even if there were no political laws tomorrow, let alone religious laws, we wouldn't all become robbers, rapists, murderers, and all the rest of that. I mean, that's just not how we would live. We've gotten to where we are because of, I would say, evolutionary considerations that have us behave to some extent the way we do. And so it finally comes down to inspiration. So the question is, where are you going to get your inspiration from? I think religion is a perfectly legitimate place to get inspiration from. There's absolutely no question in my mind. It's not for me, personally. I get inspiration out of science questions, out of the value of a world, out of an amazing puzzle that's out there, out of wanting to know, and out of sharing knowledge and things of that sort and being part of that whole thing. So for me, that's the inspiration, where it comes from, and I guess I don't need an outside source, but I don't see any reason why religion doesn't have an absolutely proper role to fill, at least in inspiration.
And Stu, now let me return the favor and invite you to ask Satyan a question.
Well, I guess I could ask you sort of the same question in reverse. I mean, you are a practicing scientist. Of course, I do find that difficult to figure out. It's not like I wasn't religious at one time in my life. I was never wildly religious, you know, but I was brought up in a religious household. We were, you know, well, we weren't Sunday churchgoers, but we were Saturday synagogue goers. Occasionally. We were the high holiday types, you know. So, but we paid our dues and all that, so it was okay. But I had all the training. I was bar mitzvahed, you know, and all the rest of that. Kicking and screaming, but nonetheless, bar mitzvahed. So I lived that life and so forth. But then as I became a scientist, and the science became more and more a part of my life, and in particular, I have to feel as a biologist, I will say this, that I think the hardest of sciences to brook with religion, with sort of religious beliefs, is evolution. I can sort of understand physicists who maintain a religious perspective, or even maybe mathematicians. It's much harder for me to understand it from a biologist's perspective, even though I know biologists who are religious, and that's fine. So I guess my question to you is, how do you bring those things together? How do you make that work?
So first of all, I'll just say the thing about evolution, which is I see no tension between evolution and Scripture. So if somebody says to me, evolution is the way it happened, that's the way the world that God allowed it to happen, it wouldn't stun me at all, and I'm totally happy with that being the case. I don't see Genesis in some sense as a tension with that thing. So it doesn't. I have no issues with biological data that we have so far, right? But more importantly to me, because I have no tension with faith and religion in terms of biology, when I'm looking at what science does offer, to me, it only offers certain things. Namely, it offers a better understanding, a clear set of tools to understand the laws of nature, but it doesn't address any of these other deeper questions. And to me, that's why it's.
Well, I'm sorry, so what other questions, though?
For example, the big questions that I was asking you about, who are we? What are we doing here? Right? And the fact that we as humanity notice and feel a sense of injustice or a sense of beauty in the world today, a sense of longing for relationships. And I see that science doesn't address these things. In other words, what it's doing, it's measuring, it's classifying, it's structuring, it's organizing, it's presenting. But historically, it's showing how we're related to one another. But it doesn't address these deeper needs of who we are. And so, my guess is, as an atheist, one could answer those in a certain way, and as a Christian, one can solve those in a certain way. As a Jew, one can solve those in a certain way. But those ways are all faith statements to me. In other words, those aren't built in through the laws of science. You're getting those from extrinsic values.
So I have a sense it's a little bit of a straw man in this argument, in that I don't think science makes too many of those claims. I don't think science actually claims to be the only way to understand everything.
Absolutely true.
Actually, I think science is, in its better days, more humble than that.
Absolutely
It's not
true.
always so,
Absolutely
I admit, but in its better days, it's far more humble than that. And that the best scientists, as you know, is sort of my issue, think really about what they don't know and not what they do know. They're not. One doesn't get proud because you made a discovery. You think, well, now what's the next thing to do here, you know? So I think science is very involved in mystery and all of those kinds of ideas. I do think science can, if you want it to, provide meaning. It can provide answers like, who am I, or what am I doing here? They may not be as big an answer as the religious answer, I'll admit that, but I think they're a perfectly acceptable answer. They're a good enough answer for me to live by and get on to the next thing. Indeed, I think in some cases, I would say the religious answer can hold you back from getting on to the next thing. It's too big an answer, as it were, for what we, I'd say not so humbly, think are such big questions, like who am I? Like, who gives a shit?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, to some extent, right?
That's fair.
You know?
No, that's fair. Well, I guess to me, the reason I care about issues of faith is not because I have this need and I'm desperate to have it plugged in. Right? and somehow the Christian, they just sing better songs, so it just fits in. That's not the point. The point is I actually think it's the truth. In other words, I think there's enough evidence out there to point to the fact that the story we see in the Jewish scriptures is fulfilled in the life of Christ, and it's actually measurable in some sense, and hence I buy it. Not because there's this gaping hole, right?
Well, that's sort of a scientific buy-in, isn't it? I mean, you're claiming that it's an evidence-based buy-in,
Yeah,
that you buy into religion based on evidence.
I do. That's certainly part of it. Without evidence, I wouldn't. I mean, for example, you give me 10 different texts, and they all say different ways of what it means to be morally good. Well, who am I to pick which one's right? And you give me no text, right? You give me the scientific one, which is like, hey, there's nothing. And I have to pick one. Well, what tools do I have to pick one? So if there's anything else that's testable out there for me, the fact about the Christian faith and the Judeo-Christian faith is there are some historical claims being made, and that's attractive to me. The fact you can actually do something to it.
So I'm going to put you on a hot seat if I
Yeah,
may.
please.
Does this
there.
mean to you that other religious faiths do not have evidence?
Well, if I do believe that there is truth with a capital T, then that means the Gauss-Bonnet theorem is true and there are other things that are wrong. And what that means is that doesn't mean that the other faiths are... So to say that all the other faiths are nothing is dangerous and incorrect, because we are all claiming to reach to God. We want something bigger because I believe God made us. So all these are ways of looking at and reaching to God. But I do think that the Judeo-Christian way is the true way. Absolutely true. I would say that there is something right in math and there is something wrong in math.
So it is more right than the various other faiths?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is, for example, if somebody says, if the Christian faith says, let me tell you this, the Christian faith says Jesus is the Messiah that the Jewish faith has been asking for. The Islam faith says that is not true. The Jewish faith says that is not true. So somebody has to be right and somebody, you can't all say that's true, right? So one of it's right and other people are wrong.
Well, we could all be wrong.
That's certainly true. That is certainly true. Absolutely. That's true.